My name is Lois. I'm 66 years old and have lived for more than 3 decades in the same house in Arlington, Virginia. Each wall here carries a part of my story. I've worked my whole life cleaning other people's houses, swallowing fatigue, saving every penny to give my daughter Grace a better life than mine. And you know what's most curious? I thought that as I got older, I would finally have peace, that my daughter would be by my side, with gratitude. But what if I told you that a simple cell phone audio changed everything? Have you ever felt that something was wrong but couldn't explain it? A butterflies in your stomach? As if something inside you already knew the truth before it even appeared? I felt it. For a long time, I ignored the signs, until my daughter sent me by mistake a voice message that was for her husband. When I pressed play, I understood everything. In this video, I'll tell you what was in that message. And more than that, I'll tell you what I did afterwards. Because sometimes, it is in silence that justice begins. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. Sometimes, what destroys a life is not a scream. It's a phrase said coldly, in the tone of someone who has forgotten everything you did for him. The message I received from my daughter was supposed to be sent to her husband, but it was for me that it arrived. And what I heard there, it was worse than any fight. In less than 3 minutes, I heard my daughter talking about me as if I were a burden. She coldly said that she had already researched a cheap nursing home, and that if she could convince me to sign some paperwork, she would be able to renovate the new kitchen with the money from my house. To this day, the sound of that voice echoes inside. Before continuing, I want to ask you one thing. If this story has ever tightened your chest in any way, stay with me until the end. I know I'm not the only one to carry a disappointment like this, and if you feel like this story is yours too, help me by liking me, subscribing to the channel. Sometimes we need to come together in silence to endure what alone would be too much, because no one should grow old feeling like they've been discarded. I remember as if it were today the day I received the news that I was pregnant with Grace. I was 22, working as a helper in a cafe in Alexandria, and I thought I was building a life with the man who claimed to love me. When I told him, he just disappeared. No connection, no explanation. My mother, a tough but warm-hearted woman, the daughter of Italian immigrants, welcomed me in silence. She just said, "We'll be able to handle it." And we did. It was in this house that it all began. There was no asphalt on the street when I bought this land, only dirt and weeds. I raised each wall with the help of neighbors, made food for the bricklayer in exchange for small favors. It wasn't easy. I cleaned a lot of toilets, waxed a lot of rich people's floors in Georgetown, while Grace was growing up. I did extra odd jobs on Sundays, selling muffins with cinnamon and nutmeg at the Wilson Boulevard Market. I remember saving coin by coin to buy her notebooks. Grace was a good student, had curious eyes and small hands that were always drawing on my apron with a pen. She was always the reason I got out of bed. When fatigue hit, when I couldn't feel my legs anymore, I remembered her little face waiting for me at the school door, and that gave me strength that I didn't even know I had. Over time, I was able to get her into a better school, then a community college. I worked twice as hard so she wouldn't feel ashamed of the clothes, the conditions, and when she graduated, with that diploma in hand, she called me on stage at the ceremony. This woman here made me who I am. Everyone applauded. That day I swore it was worth it. We were flesh and nail, until marriage. Grace married Richard, a young man she met at the company where she got her first job. At first he was polite, too kind, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy, as if he was always analyzing everything, measuring. On the day of the wedding, I remember that he thanked his mother-in-law for having raised such a determined woman. But that was it. No hug, no real affection. And there, deep in my chest, I felt that something had changed. In the first years of marriage, he still came to visit me. I called, asked for recipes. On Sundays, I kept making pancakes and orange juice, and I left the table set even if she said she wouldn't come, just in case, just to not lose the habit. But the absences began to be repeated. The phone calls decreased. Birthdays were getting empty. She said that adult life was busy, that I had to understand. And I understood. I understood too much. Until one day, on the eve of my 65th birthday, I spent all day tidying up the house. I made cornbread, fried chicken as she liked, left the room smelling of lavender. I even bought a new towel. She sent me a message in the late afternoon. "Mom, something unforeseen has arisen. We'll have to reschedule." I sat there, in the chair at the headboard, with the fabric napkin on my lap, alone. There is one thing that no one talks about loneliness in old age. It is not the silence of the house that hurts the most. It is the echo of the voices that were once alive there. Sometimes we give so much, who forgets to keep a little for himself. And when she looks back, she realizes that she was empty, waiting for a return that never came. If you've felt it too, write here in the comments. I've lived it, or it touched me. Because there are pains that only those who have been through it understand, and it's good to know that we're not alone. I walk around the house today, and everything is still in place. The picture frames with the photos of her small, the drawing she made of me with a blue dress and big hair hanging on the wall of the hallway. Even the cracked glass of the kitchen clock remains the same. But there's one thing that has changed. The void. He now has weight. And it was within this scenario, this house made of memories and silences, that voice message arrived. I wonder what she said exactly, and what did I do after listening to it? You will understand everything, but only if he remains here with me. Because what comes next, I didn't even imagine I would have the courage to face. After Grace married Richard, a lot changed. But at first, I didn't want to see it. It was easier to think that it was just a phase, that every new couple moves away a little, that soon she would call me again to ask for a banana bread recipe or complain about something at work. Before, she called me almost every day, sometimes just to tell you that I was tired or to say that she thought of me when she passed in front of the cafeteria where we went on Sundays. But over time, the calls were decreasing. 1 week without news, then 2. When I called, she answered in a hurry, as if she was always too busy for me. And I wondered, am I being inconvenient? Am I caring too much? I started to wait for her to look for me, but then the phone went silent. On holidays, I left the table set even without confirmation. Her plate, her favorite glass, the blue tablecloth with daisies, everything is the same, as it always was. But she sent messages at the end of the day saying that her mother-in-law had called, that they needed to solve something in the condominium, that they were exhausted, and I smiled at the screen, wrote "Okay, daughter," and went to store the food in the Tupperware. When she came, she was no longer the same. I sat looking at my cell phone. I didn't ask myself how I was, and he began to say things that hurt me, without realizing it, perhaps. Mom, you should stop worrying about this house. It's getting old. These things get tired. Or, nowadays no one does things that way anymore. You should donate this stuff. Junk. She called my memories junk. My hand-sewn bedspreads, the crockery inherited from my mother, the books I read with her on my lap. They became junk, and I kept quiet. Because I have always preferred silence to confrontation. Because he thought that if he didn't say anything, things would work themselves out. But inside me, something began to fall apart. Her presence no longer brought me peace. It carried weight, as if I needed to justify myself for existing, for occupying the space that I built myself. There was one Sunday in particular, which was marked. She arrived late with Richard driving. They entered as if they were hurried guests, sat down, ate without commenting on the taste. She asked if I had ever thought about selling the house because it's too big to be alone. I replied, with all the calmness in the world, that this was where I had planted my life, and she blurted out, "But Mom, you can't live only in the past." That cut me more than any silence. I wondered if she told others about me, if she said I was stubborn, outdated, the difficult old woman. One day, I went into her room to drop off an old book I found. I thought she would like it, and I saw a box with my papers. Documents, bills, copies of deeds, everything mixed together. I asked her what that was, and she said, "Oh, I'm trying to organize your things to make it easier. Something will happen, right?" And he chuckled. That phrase kept hammering in my head for days. I tried to ignore it, as I always did. I tried to think that she just wanted to help, but something inside me started screaming, because as much as the tone was meek, what I felt was that they were erasing me, little by little, with sweet words that hid contempt. And that's when that fate gave me the truth at once, raw and without anesthesia, because what came next, I could never imagine. What is a daughter capable of saying? When do you think Mom isn't listening? When Grace called me saying that the building where she lived with Richard was going to undergo a plumbing renovation, and that they needed a few days in a quieter place, I didn't even think twice. I said that the house was open, that they could come, that I would find a way. I always did. The next day, they arrived with large suitcases, a speaker, A noisy dog that jumped on everything and knocked over my vase of ferns right at the entrance. I took a deep breath. I thought it was going to be for a short time, but the days turned into weeks, and without me noticing, my house became less mine. Richard began to exchange things. He removed the paintings from the living room, saying they were visually heavy, pushed my cabinet to the corner because the light wasn't coming in properly, changed the kitchen rug because he thought it was old-fashioned. I didn't say anything, not even when I saw my pillow embroidered with my mother's initials in the basket of things to donate. One day, I went into the bathroom and saw that my creams, my soaps, everything had been pushed into a corner. The space was now theirs. I started to walk differently inside my own house. I avoided turning on the TV so as not to disturb her. I ate earlier to leave the kitchen free. Grace said, "Mom, we're trying to make the environment lighter, more modern. You have to let go." I felt like an intruder, a guest who did not pay rent. And the worst, they started talking about me as if I wasn't there. Richard once said, laughing, that the spare room was better than the asylum where his mother had ended up. Grace replied that she was still going to find a way to convince me. Convince of what? Whence? I was silent, because silence for me has always been a kind of resistance. But there, it no longer seemed to be enough. At dinner, they started serving the food without calling me. I heard whispers. I saw looks. And all the decisions in the house began to be made without me. One day, returning from the market, I saw two strangers entering the room with a tape measure. Richard explained to me later. "They are friends of ours. We want to help you modernize this space. It's all very dated. They mediated my house, as if she were theirs, as if I had already signed something, as if they were getting ready to leave." Grace began to repeat, "Mom, you needed to have someone to take care of you. It's getting harder and harder to live alone." And even though she lived under my roof, she spoke as if I was a problem to be solved. But they forgot one detail. This house, no matter how much they tried to redesign, was still mine. And I had already learned that silence protects, but it also prepares. And what they didn't know, it was that an old woman in silence is like a pressure cooker on low heat. She seems quiet, but all it takes is a snap, and everything starts to leak out. And the snap came, because one day that phone vibrated, and what I heard there, no one else could erase. Do you want to know what was in that message? I'll tell you, word for word. That morning, I was finishing folding the towels in the bathroom cabinet when the cell phone vibrated on the kitchen table. It was a voicemail from Grace. Her name flashed on the screen as it always did, but with one detail. The message didn't come with a "Hi, Mom" or a "I need to talk to you." Only the play button appeared. I was surprised. She rarely sent audio. I thought it was something urgent. I sat on the chair with the towel on my lap, pressed the button, and the world, as I knew it, ended there. Her voice came out crisp, without hesitation. "Richard, I can't stand her here anymore. I've already researched a nursing home in Falls Church. It costs $800 a month. With what is left, we can start the kitchen renovation. Carol has already seen the house papers." My heart stopped for a second. I thought I had heard it wrong, but the recording continued. She said that I was getting slower and slower, that I didn't pay attention to anything. And in the end, came the phrase that tore me inside. "She will think it's a medical consultation. Just take it and sign. Then we'll take care of the rest." And they laughed. She and Richard, laughing at me, of my trust, of my surrender, of my love. I sat there, holding the cell phone as if it were a bomb. I trembled. The towel fell to the floor. I don't know how long I stayed in that position, without blinking. The audio was short, 2 minutes and 58 seconds. But the damage, it was as if it had lasted a lifetime. She spoke of me as if I were an old piece of furniture, a nuisance, a logistical problem to be solved. Me, who gave up everything for her to study. Me, who knelt down to clean other people's floors so she would have a new uniform. Me, who ate leftovers from a cold lunchbox to pay for her graduation. I saw myself in that recording as a burden, a number, a name on notary paperwork. I felt the air disappear. The kitchen rotated, and the only thing I could do was turn off my cell phone. I stood there, looking at the floor, and trying to understand, where did I lose my daughter? Look, I'm here, opening my heart, telling everything without cutting the wounds. If you're still here with me, listening to this story, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel too, because I still have a lot of things in store to tell you, because I know that there are people out there who have felt a stab like that from someone they should protect, not hurt. And if this story is hitting inside, so it stays, because it was after this audio that the silent woman inside me woke up. Do you know what I did with that recording? You'll find out. And you won't believe what I found soon after. That night, I didn't close my eyes. I lay on the bed, but the pillow seemed to be made of stone. The sound of her laughter at the end of the audio played in my head like a broken clock, repetitive, unbearable. And the more I tried to forget, the more the memories came, as if every bit of my life decided to present itself again, only to ask myself, is this why you lived all that? I found myself again in my early 20s, holding Grace for the first time in my lap at the county hospital, my arms aching from scrubbing floors in the Dunhill home. I remembered when she had a high fever at the age of 6, and I sat all night with her on my lap, wetting the cloth with ice water, while praying silently to my mother, who was already gone. There was that difficult year when the scholarship didn't come out, and I accepted 3 more houses to clean. I came home so exhausted that I couldn't even feel my legs anymore, but seeing her studying filled me with strength. I remembered when her sneakers got flat in the winter, and I fixed them with hot glue and tape inside so I wouldn't hurt my foot, and yet she said, "It looks perfect, Mom. It looks new." I kept that compliment for years. When Grace turned 14, I was invited to her boss's wedding. It was the first time I would have a chance to dance, to get ready. But it was just on the day she had the school choir performance. And I went, of course. I arrived sweaty. With the dress I got worn, but with my chest puffed out with pride. She sang with such sweetness. And now, that same girl said that I was a nuisance, a budget number, an old woman to be dispatched. And he still laughed at it. Rhea, memory is a cruel place when we are betrayed, because she throws in our face every choice we made for love, every waver, every yes given when everything inside you wanted to say no. I found myself sleeping on the living room floor again for 3 years, so she could have the bigger room. I remembered the dinners I refused, the clothes I recycled, the visits to the doctor that I postponed because Grace needed it. It was always for her, always, and deep down I didn't regret it, because loving for me was never an agreement. It was a decision. But there, alone in that bed, with short breathing and tight chest, I realized that I had raised a woman who knew how to laugh at her own mother behind her back. That's it. That was what hurt the most. Not the betrayal itself, but the hidden contempt, the disdain. Because Grace didn't hate me. She ignored me, as if I had stopped being a person, as if I were just a stage to be overcome before the next reform. And there, lying in silence, I understood. If I didn't do anything, she would. She was already doing it, and there was more hidden in this story. That recording, it was just the beginning, and what I discovered later made me see the real size of the plan they were putting together behind my silence. Can you believe that a cousin of my daughter was in the middle of all this? So listen to what's next, because that's where the noose really tightens. That night was the longest of my life. After that message, I couldn't lie down anymore. I walked around the house barefoot, with a heavy heart, as if I was carrying all the decades on my back. Each step through the wooden floor was a reunion with a memory. I walked past the room and saw the armchair where Grace used to wrap herself with a pink blanket when she got sick. I put my fingers on the lamp I bought on our first Christmas together, still at the time when we made decorations with colored paper. I went to the hallway and stopped in front of the wall in the photos. There she was, at the age of 9, with that crooked smile with a soft tooth, holding the cake that I baked myself with cash dough because I didn't have money for more. I lowered myself slowly, knee creaking as usual, and sat on the kitchen floor. The kitchen, my refuge, where so many times I cried in secret, laughing afterwards, because Grace came to hug me without understanding the reason. I sat there, in the cold of the tiles, and played again. Her voice came out clear, direct, without trembling. It was the voice of someone who had decided, a voice that erased me without pain. Hearing that for the second time didn't make me cry. He silenced me. It was a mourning, but not an ordinary mourning. It was the mourning of those who realize that they are alive. But she was buried alive in the hearts of those she loved most. She will think it's a doctor's appointment. That phrase turned into a blunt knife spinning inside me. That I have faced so much, that I never asked for anything but love, was going to be taken like someone who takes an old suitcase to the hold. I found myself talking to God and thought. I whispered inside, is this what I lived for? Is that what I fought for? That I humiliated myself? That I smiled tiredly just so as not to worry anyone? I didn't hear an answer, but in silence, I felt something inside me moving. I took an old notebook from the sideboard drawer and started writing. It wasn't a letter to her. It was a letter to me. I wrote my full name, Lois Antonelli, as if presenting herself again in the mirror. I wrote everything I've ever been: faithful wife, single mother, cleaner in more than 40 houses, improvised seamstress, nurse at dawn, school counselor, protective, friend. I was so many things, but I never stopped being a woman. And now, it needed to be something I never needed before. It needed to be my own defense. In that letter, I recalled who I was, first and foremost, before tiredness, before silence, before the betrayal. And there, sitting on the floor, with the pen trembling between my fingers, I made my first decision. She would not be taken as if she had no voice. It wouldn't be removed from my own story like a comma out of place. And if you've been here until now, listening to all this, I only ask you one thing. Stay with me until the end. Because what I discovered after that early morning, everything changed. Really, the most remarkable part of my story is yet to happen. The day dawned, and with it, so did I. It was still early, but he already knew what he needed to do. That wasn't just a voice message. It was a warning. A warning. It's a clue. Do you know that Carol she mentioned? The cousin who works in the registry sector? That's that. That woman. There was more hidden than I imagined, and you will understand why. Because when I started putting the pieces together, I saw that the plan was much bigger, much dirtier, and the truth, it was yet to come. The next morning, even before the sun warmed the sidewalk, I already had my bag on my shoulder and my coat closed up to my neck. I walked to the Bank of America branch on Wilson Boulevard, the same one where I opened my account when I still wore punctured shoes and took 2 buses to get to the services. I went in with my head held high. I didn't sit down. I waited standing until I was served. When the manager came, a young man with an automatic smile, I asked to speak privately. He led me to a glass room, and there, with my hand still cold from the serene street, I said, I want to block my cards, change my passwords, and cancel all the permissions my daughter has. He widened his eyes. He asked me to explain, and I did, calmly, but with the firmness of someone who has already buried loved ones, has been humiliated, has not eaten to pay the bill. I said that my daughter was trying to get me out of my house, that she and her cousin Carol had made a false power of attorney. His face changed. He asked to check. When he pulled the history, there were the movements, transfers that I never authorized, purchases in the name of Lois A., made by another address, another IP. The manager looked at me, not knowing what to say. I just confirmed, she's trying to rob me. For the first time, I uttered it out loud, and I didn't tremble. I was firm. I signed new documents, reset codes, canceled everything. I left with new cards, and the feeling that for the first time in a long time, I had done something for myself. I walked back looking at the ground, as if each step was an answer. When I got home, I found Grace sitting on the couch, with her hair tied up and her computer on her lap. She looked at me in that sweet way and asked, "Did you sleep well, Mom?" I just stared at her. I didn't answer, but inside, something in me was no longer the same. You know that time when you realize that no one will protect you if you don't do it yourself? What is no point in expecting gratitude from those who no longer know what honor is? It's hard, but it is liberating. If you've ever been through a moment like this, comment here. I know how it is, or I understand you. Because sometimes we need to put the words out to understand that the pain we feel, it's real. After that day, I began to observe. Every word, every gesture. It was no longer Lois who waited for the rain to pass. It was Lois who took the coat and left anyway. And little did I know that what I found out the next day at the records office was going to change everything. Because Carol, he was not only an accomplice, she was the main link. And when I saw what she had done on my behalf, my blood ran cold. You will understand what it was, and why, from then on, I could no longer hesitate. I spent that whole day with a lump in my throat, as if something was stuck between my chest and soul. And when night fell, I sat on the edge of my bed, turned on the yellow lamp that always accompanied me in the most difficult moments, and pulled an old notebook from the drawer. He had a worn cape, a faded flower in the corner, and I remember buying it for $2 in a little shop in Falls Church many years ago. I sat there with silence taking over the house that no longer seemed mine, and began to write a letter, But it was not a letter to Grace or to Richard or to anyone else. It was for me. It was for the woman I went, for the woman I had forgotten still existed. Lois, I wrote at the top in trembling handwriting, you need to remember who you are. And the words began to come out as if they had been stuck for decades. I spoke of the girl who grew up hearing her mother say that love is proven with work. I spoke of the young woman who was abandoned pregnant at a bus stop in Alexandria, with her hands shaking and the future collapsing. I talked about the mother who turned 3 jobs to give her daughter a life she never had. I spoke of guilt, of the desperate attempt to never let Grace feel the same abandonment I once felt. And I talked about fears, of the little fears that have sewn my entire life together. Fear of not being enough, fear of disappointing, fear of losing the only family he had. While I was writing, I missed my mother deeply. I remembered her teaching me how to make tomato sauce, saying, "Lois, the secret is patience. Everything that boils fast overflows." And there, in that letter, I realized that I myself had overflowed inside, silently, for years. I also wrote about Grace, about how I screwed her up without realizing it. As I gave too much, I gave too much. I put her happiness above any healthy limit, and how all of this, instead of bringing gratitude, has brought a kind of greed that grows where there is no restraint. Recognizing this hurt more than the voicemail, because that's not all she did to me. It was what I allowed for so long. I read aloud every line I wrote, as if I were confessing my pains to an old friend. I let you use me, my daughter, and I did it thinking it was love. It was the first time I said it out loud, and the pain came like a sob that wouldn't go away. I took a deep breath, let the pen rest on the page, closed my eyes and felt something rare at this stage of life, clarity. After almost 3 pages, I stopped. The hand hurt, my chest too. And then I wrote a sentence that changed everything inside me. They think I'm a dumb old woman, but they forget that I was the one who taught my daughter to walk. Now it's my turn to walk alone. When I finished reading that last line, I felt a different silence. It was not the silence of pain. It was the silence of someone who finally understands that something is over and something else is beginning. I left the letter on the nightstand. It wasn't for Grace. It wasn't for the world. It was for me. A reminder, an anchor, and a promise. I closed the window, adjusted my coat on my body, and looked at myself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, I saw a woman who was not expecting to be saved by anyone. I knew that this letter marked the beginning of a path that no one imagined I would be able to follow. A path that would require courage, intelligence, and a kind of coolness that I never had to use, hitherto. Because in that moment, as I turned off the lamp and felt the night rest on my shoulders, I knew exactly what I was going to do the next day. And my God, if Grace had known what was coming, she would have thought twice before underestimating me. And it is precisely here, right here, that everything changes. Because the plan that began in that letter, no one saw it coming. I woke up early that day, even before the noise of cars on the street, before the movement of neighbors taking the dogs for a walk. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the letter I left on the nightstand. That last sentence seemed bigger than me, as if it had been written by a part of me that I no longer knew. And it was there, still with the room half dark, that I decided I was no longer going to watch my own life happen. I was going to be the author, slowly, like someone who takes a deep breath before crossing a bridge. I got up, put on a jacket, and went to the kitchen to put water on the fire. The silence seemed different now, a silence that obeyed me. As the coffee passed, I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. I hadn't spoken to Evelyn in years. She had been a clerk at the Arlington courthouse for more than 2 decades, and I always admired her for her firmness, for the way she said that, "The law is cold, Lois, but it protects those who know how to touch it." I touched her number with a trembling finger. When I heard the voice on the other side, I felt my heart beat faster. "Evelyn, it's me, Lois." There was a second of silence, followed by an emotional sigh. "Lois, my God, it's been a long time. Is everything okay?" I didn't cry. I didn't lose my voice. I replied with the calm that I found strange myself. "I need your help." She did not ask for details. He just said, "Come here today at 3. And before that, look for attorney Amelia Price in Fairfax. It is the best I know in asset protection for the elderly. Say I sent it." I hung up the phone with steady hands. It was the first time in a long time that someone had treated me like a grown woman, not as a frail old woman, not as a burden, I spent the rest of the morning rummaging through drawers that I hadn't opened in years. I took out old receipts for repairs to the house, financing contracts that I had already paid off, documents that proved every brick I put there. I even found the paper from when I bought the land, the blue paint already half faded but still legible. I hadn't realized how much I kept of my own history. With each leaf I found, I thought, this here, no one can take it away from me. The whole house seemed to be watching me. The walls, the furniture, even the light coming in through the living room window. It was as if everything there knew that I was collecting my evidence, my silent weapons. And in the midst of this, something curious began to happen. Grace noticed. I was quieter, but it was another kind of silence. Not the silence of one who swallows his tears, but the silence of one who calculates. She walked across the room, looking at me from the corner of her eye as I arranged a stack of papers on the table. "Mom, what are you doing?" I replied without raising my head. "Fixing my life." She opened her mouth, as if to ask something, but closed. Maybe she felt something she couldn't name. Maybe I saw something in my face that I had never seen. Limit. Before continuing, let me tell you something. I'm here opening my heart and sharing a piece of my life that took me a while to understand. If it somehow touches you, or helps someone you know, help me move this story forward. Like this video, and subscribe to the channel. It may seem little, but for those who tell something so painful, it makes a huge difference. Thanks. I separated the documents again. I folded old envelopes, secured everything with an elastic band, put them in a blue folder that was stored in the back of the closet. And then, at 2 p.m, I grabbed my coat, my bag, and my courage, and left without making a sound. I walked to the bus stop, as I did in the days when I cleaned houses in Georgetown, and headed to Fairfax. The city looked grayer that day, but I sat at the window and watched the trees go by, the wind shaking the leaves, as if the world was teaching me to keep going. When I arrived at Attorney Amelia Price's office, with that glass door that reflected my tired but determined face, I understood that this would be the first step on a path from which I could not return. I pressed the handle, took a deep breath, and entered. And what happened inside? It was the beginning of the turnaround that no one imagined, because what the lawyer showed me completely changed the course of what would come later. And you'll see how all of this turned into something much bigger than I had anticipated. What she revealed to me in that office, it was just the beginning. When I pushed open the glass door of Dr. Michelle Becker's office, I felt as if I were crossing an invisible boundary between the woman who had lived under the weight of disappointment and the woman who would finally decide to raise her head. The office was small, cozy, smelling of fresh coffee and old books. She was sitting behind a dark wooden table, an African-American woman in her 50s, with a firm posture, eyes attentive, the kind of person who really listens. When he raised his face and smiled, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: security. She invited me to sit down, and I put the blue briefcase on my lap, my hands a little shaky, but my heart decided. "Dr. Becker, I don't even know where to start," I said. She just replied, "Start from the beginning, Lois. I'm here to listen." And then, I told you everything. The voice message, my daughter's cold words which still echoed in my head, her laugh with Richard, the mysterious papers, Cousin Carol, the accesses that I never authorized. I told him about the house, about how I built each piece with my sweat, and about the real fear of losing everything. The lawyer did not interrupt. He took notes, looked at me, took a deep breath as someone who feels the pain of the other. When I finished, I felt like I had lifted a huge weight off my back. She remained silent for a few seconds, flipping through my documents, until she looked up and said something I'll never forget. "You may have lost her affection, Lois, but he will not lose his dignity, and you definitely won't lose your home." Those words entered me like light in a dark room. She began to explain everything to me step by step, with a patience that moved me. He said that we would open a process of asset protection, that first we would update the deed of the house, shielding it against any attempt at irregular transfer, that we would revoke any authorization, power of attorney, or document that could have been falsified, that we would immediately start an investigation into Cousin Carol, since she had access to the public records sector. She wrote down every name, every detail, every date, and as she spoke, I felt my own spine straighten out, as if I was relearning to occupy the space of my own life. In the middle of her explanation, I took a deep breath, and I felt like talking to you, who are there listening to me. Sometimes, we spend so much time lowering our heads, trying to be good, trying to keep the peace, that we forget the strength we always had. And it was there, in that simple office in Fairfax, that I remembered the most important part of my story. It was yet to happen, and I wanted you to stay with me until the end, because what comes next, it's something that even I didn't expect. Dr. Becker organized the papers, handed me an envelope with instructions, contacts, and copies of everything. He asked me to sign some documents to revoke old permissions and consolidate my property. She explained each term as if reaching out to cross a bridge. Lois, you are doing the right thing, and it's doing it at the right time. I left that office with the envelope under my arm, but it was something else I took with me, the beginning of a peace I hadn't felt in years. Outside, the late afternoon wind was blowing against the trees of Fairfax, and I walked slowly to the bus stop, feeling that each step put my life back in my own name. When I got home, Grace looked at me from afar, suspicious. I left the bag in my room, closed the door slowly, and sat on the bed, holding the envelope that the lawyer gave me. He felt light in the hand, but I carried something that my daughter never imagined I would regain: control. And as I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts, I felt something very clear forming inside me, because the next person I needed to face, she wasn't my daughter. It was another. He was someone who thought he could play with documents. And it was then, exactly at that moment, that I knew, tomorrow, I would go to the Arlington Records Department. And what would I find out there? I would change everything again. When I walked into the Arlington Records desk that morning, I felt a shiver that wasn't coming from the overly strong air conditioning, but from what I already intuited I was going to find. I walked down the narrow hallway, with that smell of old paper mixed with reheated coffee, and asked to speak to someone in the residential documents area. The girl at the counter, very young, pointed me to a room in the back. I sat down, put my blue briefcase on my lap, and waited. When they called my name, I handed over everything I had brought: original deed, receipts, my documents. The employee started typing, clicking on files, and then turned to me with a look I knew well, the look of someone who finds something he doesn't want to say out loud. "Donna Lois, could you come here, please?" I stood up slowly, feeling the firm ground beneath my feet, and walked over. She turned the monitor in my direction, and there, on the screen, was something I could never imagine. A document filed the previous month, dated, signed, or rather forged with my signature. An alleged donation of my house to my daughter, in recognition of the care received and harmonious coexistence. I read that sentence as if I were reading my own stolen certificate of existence. There were stamps, registration numbers. Everything is very well put together. I felt my legs weigh down, but I didn't hold on to the table. I stood firm. The employee asked me in a low voice, "Do you recognize this document?" I just said, "No, and that's not my signature." She pursed her lips, made an expression of discomfort, and called the supervisor. And so it was that minutes later, I was holding a printed copy of that farce. My hand didn't tremble, but my heart seemed to beat inside a box that was too small. It was Carol. It had to be. She who worked there. She who always said that she loved Aunt Lois. She who as a teenager knocked on my door crying, saying that her parents were fighting, and that she needed a place to spend the night. I took her in so many times. I gave him food. I gave bed. I gave advice. And now she had filed my ruin with the coldness of someone who stamps a mail envelope. In the middle of this avalanche, I paused. A silence that came from within. Funny how some memories come back with force when life shows its teeth. The memory of Carol, lying on my couch with a blanket up to her neck, saying, "You are the only one who understands me." That stuck in my chest. And sometimes I think that it is precisely these memories, the sweet ones, the ones that are supposed to protect us, that hurt the most when they break. If you also have a memory like this, which marks you to this day, share it in the comments. It can be something simple, a phrase, a moment. Sometimes splitting is the only way to lighten the weight a little. I returned to Dr. Michel's office that same day, entering without warning, with the briefcase pressed to his chest. When she saw my face, she didn't even have to ask. I handed over the forged document. She adjusted her glasses, read the entire sheet with her finger following each line, and then leaned back in her chair. "Lois, this is not just a coup. It is a serious crime. And now we have proof." Those words made the air go back into my lungs. She explained each step. Formal complaint to the notary's office, opening an investigation, contesting the validity of the document, notifying the police, and requesting immediate protection of my property. He said that Carol could lose her job, respond in court, and even get penalty, and that Grace, well, her participation would not be left out. It was a clear case of attempted appropriation. As the lawyer spoke, I remembered Grace's smile at age 8, all dirty with flour, because she wanted to help me make cookies. I remembered Carol at 15, calling me second mother, and there, inside that office, I realized something bitter. Sometimes the greatest betrayal does not come from the big fights, but from the small fake smiles that we never question. I left there with the reinforced envelope of documents and a determination that I myself did not know I had. With every Fairfax street I crossed, I felt like I was stepping on something different, as if I now had real ground, not the one others tried to pull under my feet. But as I walked to the bus stop, I felt a twinge in my chest. It was not fear, it was a kind of warning, because one thing I knew very well: when someone discovers that the scam has been unmasked, the reaction can be even more dangerous. And what happened when Grace realized I was starting to mess with the wires of her plan? Well, that was the part I never imagined facing. I spent the whole day in silence, like someone sharpening an invisible knife, not a metal knife, but an emotional knife of truth, one of those that cuts word for word what needs to be said. I prepared dinner as I did in ancient times: well-browned roast chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, salad with olive oil and lemon. As I mashed the potatoes, I felt my hands firmer than ever. The smell of food filled the house, but it did not bring comfort. It was a scenario. It was a stage, and I knew exactly what was going to happen there. When Grace and Richard arrived, they came in smiling, as if nothing was out of place, as if I hadn't figured out every detail of their plan. They sat down at the table and began to eat, talking to each other, asking for amenities, making noises of normal life. Their audacity hurt more than any word said in that audio. I served the dishes, sat down, took a deep breath, and in the middle of the meal, I grabbed the remote. "Will you allow me to hear something?" I asked. My voice came out soft, so calm that even I was surprised. Grace smiled, distracted. "Of course, Mom." I plugged the pen drive into the TV. I pressed play, and then her voice filled the room. "Richard, I can't stand her here anymore. I've already researched a nursing home." The noise of the cutlery stopped. The clock on the wall seemed to have held her breath as well. Grace stood still, as if she were listening to the ghost speak. Richard lowered his fork. No one blinked. The recording continued, raw, complete, without cuts. And when it was over, I let a few seconds of silence hang in the air, the kind of silence that weighs more than screaming. That's out of context, Mom," Grace stammered, already shaking in her hands. "Out of context?" I repeated. "So maybe this will help." I took the forged document out of my briefcase. I slowly placed it on the table, sliding the paper until it stopped right in front of it. The light from the lamp hit the stamp of the registry office like a slap. "Did you give my house to yourself, Grace? Or was it Carol who wrote this lie?" She turned pale. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Richard stared at the floor. His shoulders shrugged. He knew. I always knew. I lifted my chin, looked into her eyes, and said, in the firmest voice that has ever come out of me, "You guys got the kind of old woman wrong that I am." Grace began to babble explanations, to put together words that didn't add up to anything. Richard tried to say that it was a misunderstanding. I just got up from the table, calmly picked up my plate and put it in the sink. "That was your last dinner in this house." My tone didn't tremble. It didn't. He did not apologize. It was firm like old wood that resists time. Grace stood, nervous, her eyes teary, but it wasn't regret. It was fear. Richard touched her arm as if trying to restrain her, and I turned my back on both of them, wiping my hands on the dishcloth as if closing an entire chapter of life. But I wasn't done yet, and they had no idea what I would prepare for the next day. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, as if my body already knew that this would be a day of rupture. The house was silent, but it wasn't the heavy silence of the last few months. It was a silence of decision, a silence that accompanied me like an old friend who finally came back to help me put things in order. I put on my coat, tied up my hair, and sat down at the kitchen table with all the documents organized by Dr. Michel. I didn't tremble. He did not hesitate. He only read each paper with the calm of someone who knows exactly what he is doing. First, I prepared the eviction order. With a period of 15 days, signed and stamped as the lawyer directed, I folded the document carefully, put it inside a manila envelope, and left it on the kitchen counter, where Grace would not have been able to ignore it. Then I sat down at the computer, logged into the health insurance portal, and canceled the additional benefit that placed Grace as a dependent, a gesture she never thanked but always used. I clicked confirm without blinking. I then called the bank and withdrew her access to the additional card. The attendant asked if I wanted to justify it. I just replied, to be safe, and it was the truest answer I have ever given in my life. When I finished this part, I prepared the envelope for Carol. In it, I placed the notification that she would be formally prosecuted for falsification of a public document, instructed by Dr. Michelle. Together, I added a copy of the graphotechnical report that proved that signature at the notary's office was not mine. I closed the envelope tightly, as if closing any ties that might still be left there. And then, I sat on the porch with my hot coffee in my hands. The early morning light hit the houses on the street, and everything seemed clearer. The trees swayed slowly, the cars began to circulate, and I felt a strange tranquility, the same tranquility you feel when you finally organize a closet that had been messy for years. I took a sip of the coffee and thought, they dug their own ruin with my aged hands as a witness. There was no anger in my chest, nor sadness, just a deep certainty that I was doing what was right. The cut was clean, irrevocable, and for the first time I didn't feel guilty. The door to the living room opened slowly, and Grace appeared on the threshold, her face crumpled with sleep, as if she still believed I was the same as before. When she saw the brown envelope on the counter, she frowned. "Mom, what is this?" I didn't answer. I just took another sip of coffee and looked at the street, as if finally learning to look ahead. And little did she know that this was just the beginning. The next step, the most painful of all, was yet to come. That's it. Exactly there. That the masks are really starting to fall. When Grace opened the dump envelope, I heard from the balcony the dry sound of the paper being crumpled. It was like hearing a branch break in the middle of winter, a sound that doesn't scare, but announces. She began to walk around the house as if looking for a fire, with hurried steps, trembling voice. "Mom, what is it? Mom, that's a joke, right?" But I remained seated in my wooden chair, holding my cup of coffee as if holding my own breath. I felt for the first time that the floor of that house belonged only to me, not to those who wanted to use me, not to those who wanted to take advantage of my silence, but to me, the woman who built every wall, every corner, every life in there. Shortly after, I heard the door slam. Grace left. I stayed there, motionless, until I heard the noise of the car starting. I thought the day would be quiet, but it didn't. An hour later, she returned. Only this time it didn't go in. She stood outside, knocking on the gate, screaming my name as if I had an obligation to run after her. "Mom, open that door. We need to talk. You can't do this to me. Mother, for God's sake." I walked into the living room, opened the curtain just enough to see her. She was red-faced, trembling with anger, or fear, I don't know. The neighbors watched from afar, and there, for the first time since it all began, I learned the power of silence. I simply pulled the curtain back, without a word, without an explanation, without justifying anything. Richard showed up in the late afternoon. He didn't scream. He knocked on the door calmly, called my name in an almost polite way as if trying to solve a traffic ticket. "Lois, I think there was a misunderstanding. Let's talk like adults." I didn't open it. Later, when he sent me an email, I replied with the sentence that the lawyer helped me write. "The house has been mine all my life. Now it will be my refuge, not my punishment." And I did. No period, no fake cordiality, only the truth. Carol then. Carol. Her desperation came quickly. Long, tearful messages, saying that it was a mistake, that we could solve it with the family, that she could lose her public job if I went ahead. They said I was exaggerating, that I didn't need to get to this point, as if they hadn't been the ones digging the hole, as if they weren't the ones pushing me. I read all the messages, one by one, and didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood that responding was somehow giving them the power to re-enter the space I had recovered. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up, if you want to walk with me to the end of this story. Sometimes we need to make it clear that we also deserve care. While they despaired outside, I stood on my porch, looking out over the street, feeling the wind blow in my face. I breathed like someone who learns again. Every silence of mine felt like a brick fitting back into the house they tried to take away from me. Somehow, I felt that I was rebuilding not only the walls, but myself. But the following days, they did show how far they were willing to go, and what happened when the eviction deadline started to run. It's something that even I didn't imagine facing, and that's what I'm going to tell you now. I followed each step of the process as if I were following my own breathing, without haste, but with firmness. Dr. Michelle called me every week, explaining the advances, sending me documents, asking for signatures. I read everything carefully, as if each line was a thread holding the structure of my life. And it was. On the 15th day after the eviction, Grace and Richard left my house without saying a word. They didn't even look back. They walked to the car carrying boxes that had previously hidden my documents, mementos, my spaces. Now, for the first time since they arrived, the house was breathing. As the door closed, I felt something like the sound of a chain being broken, an almost imperceptible but profound noise. I stood in the hallway for a few moments, listening to the new silence, this silence that seemed wider, cleaner, more mine. The following weeks were of silent transformations. The complaint against Carol advanced quickly, and when the official notification reached the registration sector, the buzz began. In less than a month, she was removed from her position. They didn't use my name in the process, but she knew. She knew exactly who had pulled the thread. One day I received a message from her. Short, desperate. I made a mistake, but you took it too far. I deleted it without answering. There are things that do not deserve an echo. The deed to the house was updated with the lifetime clause that would protect me from any future scam attempts. I signed the document in Dr. Michelle's office with a tranquility I had never felt before. The pen slid across the paper as if it were reconstructing my own identity. And that same afternoon, I sat down with her to write my New Testament. My house, my greatest asset, my refuge. It would be donated when I left, to a shelter for elderly women betrayed by their own families. May other Lois not go through what I went through, I wrote. Signing that gave me a peace I hadn't felt since Grace was a child. It was as if I was finally putting my story in the right place, not in the hands of those who hurt me, but in the hands of those who are still struggling to survive. A small local newspaper quietly ran a story about irregularities in Arlington's records sector. They didn't name names, but the neighborhood is small, the tongues are sharp, and soon conversations began in the corridors, on the sidewalks, in the supermarkets. People looked at me differently now, some with surprise, others with respect, some with astonishment, as if I had revealed a strength that no one imagined I had. And the truth is that even I didn't know, because there is no force more silent than the strength of those who, after being crushed, choose to get up without making a fuss. Many nights I sat on my porch watching the cars go by, listening to the wind beat on the trees, and I repeated to myself, justice may be slow, but when it comes, it arrives in one piece. And if you've come this far with me, let me tell you something that came from the bottom of my chest. Sometimes, we discover our own value, just when the world tries to take everything from us. And there is still something very important to happen in this story, something I never imagined facing, because the truth is, when everything seemed resolved, when I thought I had reached the end of this battle, something, or someone, came back to try to reopen wounds I thought I had closed. You need to listen to what came next. When the dust began to settle, and each piece of the puzzle found its place, it was as if life had decided to take the bill for everyone who tried to erase me. Richard was the first to fall. The company where he worked discovered through the investigation of the forgery that he had participated, directly or indirectly, in the attempts to transfer my house. Things in a corporate environment in the United States work fast when there is a legal risk. He was called to an urgent meeting. He left without a badge, without access to the system, without even the right to finish the coffee he had served that morning. The dismissal came with a clear justification: breach of ethical conduct. And with it, the paycheck that supported most of the luxury life Grace was trying to maintain. It simply evaporated. Within weeks, they were mired in debt. The wedding expense that never finished being paid, the car financing, the credit card that lived on the edge, the renovation they dreamed of doing with the money from my house. None of this could sustain itself anymore. They filed for bankruptcy, and there was no pity, no compassion, no miracle, only consequences. Consequences of the choices they made, thinking that I would always be the quiet, docile old woman. Unable to defend herself, Grace tried to resist at first. He sent messages saying that everything was under control, that it was just a phase. But the phase turned to mud, and when the bankruptcy filing became public, it began to disappear. She left the apartment, left the city, and went to live at a friend's house in Baltimore, away from it all, especially away from me. She sent some letters that I opened slowly, not out of curiosity, but out of respect for what we once were. They were full of vague phrases, shallow regrets, excuses that didn't have enough courage to tell the truth. Mom, I know I made a mistake, but life was hard. I never meant to hurt you. I just lost myself, and the most painful, I miss you. All written as if asking for a bandage after causing the cut. Carol disappeared from the city almost overnight. I learned from her neighbors, because yes, the neighborhood talks, that she asked for an internal transfer, sold some furniture in a hurry, and disappeared. They said she couldn't stand the stairs. They also said that her mother was crying in the backyard, repeating that her daughter had ruined everything with her own ambition. And it may be true. But at that point, I was no longer responsible for healing anyone. The family that tried to erase me was swallowed up by their own silence. Not because I wanted to, not because I did any harm, but because life, when it decides to be fair, acts without making a sound. I, who was treated as a burden, became the only one who still walked with dignity. The others, they disappeared from conversations, events, dinners. Nobody wanted to associate with people who forged the signature of an elderly woman. And the truth? The truth is that when I realized that no one was knocking on my door to demand something anymore, when I realized that the cell phone did not ring with veiled charges, when I noticed that the sound of my own breathing finally fit inside me, I felt such a profound freedom that it hurt. It wasn't anger, nor revenge. It was relief. Relief to be whole again. I never answered Grace's letters, not out of malice, but because I knew that if I opened that door, she would try to re-enter through the corners, rebuild dependencies, make promises she doesn't know how to keep. I didn't answer, because I needed to preserve myself. The pain of what I experienced with her was so great that any breach could drag me back, and I couldn't allow that. I shouldn't allow that. Sometimes I sit on the porch and think of the girl she was, the woman she has become, and in me, who spent so much time being the floor of others, until I remembered that I also deserved to have a roof. The old one they created to be useful, chose to be whole. He chose to live with dignity, even when it meant living away from those he loved most. But even when we think it's all over, life still holds one last turn, one last whisper, one last encounter with what we thought we had ended. And what happened days later, when I heard familiar footsteps at my gate. It's something that to this day I can't forget. I walked through that park every day, those same Bluemont trails, where I took Grace by the hand when she was little, with her head full of dreams and curious eyes, looking at the world with that brightness of someone who still believed in everything. I looked at those trees, the flowers I had always seen blooming in the same seasons, and I remembered her, running through the grass, jumping, asking me to see the squirrels and the leaves falling in the fall. Time passes, doesn't it? But not in the way we imagine. I walked around, feeling the wind in my wrinkles, and I knew that the pain that existed in my chest before was now a scar that, so marked, no longer hurt. What was once a deep cut, today was just a sign, a memory, like a knot in the wood, that over time becomes part of the tree itself. It's not that I stopped feeling what I experienced. No, but now the memories were just memories. They were no longer open, bleeding wounds. I looked at the other women on the street, the ladies with white hair and dyed hair, those who walked alone, some with sticks, others with only a calm look, and I thought, I am not the only one. And I realized something so simple and so fundamental. Loving too much is no excuse to accept everything. I thought it was. I thought that if I loved enough, if I gave myself enough, I could transform other people. But in the end, the only one I transformed was myself. It was not easy to realize this. I spent so much time thinking that the love I gave was enough, and perhaps for Grace it was at some point. But it wasn't enough for me. It wasn't enough to keep me whole. I had to lose, to understand what was worth preserving. And you know what? I finally understood that sometimes you have to lose your bonds to find yourself again. I lost confidence in my daughter, and my cousin, and even myself, for allowing the burden of carrying their weight to be so great, for so long. I loved them, yes, but what happened was that by loving too much, I lost myself, and as hard as it was to accept, I had to lose the pain, to find the woman I am again. The house is still there, still with the photos on the wall and the sofa that I always loved. But what now dwells in it is me. I am the resident who chose to live with dignity, and not just with the memory of what once was. I signed up for a group of elderly women who share stories similar to mine. A support group, you know. At first, I went in with a heavy heart, thinking it might be just another way to feel even more alone. But my God, how much strength I found there. Women who, like me, got lost in a love that was not reciprocal. Who, like me, gave too much and ended up being left behind. Do you know what I discovered? I'm not alone. I never was. I had only been silent for too long. The silence I carried for so long was not a choice. It was a prison. And now, that silence has become a shield. Not a shield of anger, but of protection. Protection of myself. I started to talk more, to listen more, to care less about what others thought. I didn't have to prove myself to anyone anymore. Not to Grace, not to Richard, not to Carol. I became the woman I had always been, but had left behind in an attempt to be what others wanted me to be. And you know, there's something liberating about that. When you realize that, in order to be whole, you no longer need the approval of the person who hurt you. I looked at the other women and knew that, like me, they had lived and learned. We all carried our stories, our pains, our silences, but at the same time, we were all more than that. I, who was once invisible even to my own daughter, today I can look in the mirror and say that the woman I see there is me, but there's more, you know. There is something that will still change, something that even after all this process left me with a sense of unease. The last letter I received, Grace's last attempt to get back together, that took me by surprise. I thought I had already closed this chapter. But now, with everything I've learned, I ask myself, can one last attempt change anything? Or do I need to let silence prevail once again? I find myself sitting here on the porch, staring at the slowly setting sun, tinting the sky with colors that feel like a silent embrace. The gentle wind touches my face, and I feel, for the first time in a long time, that the weight I was carrying is no longer on me. I was a mother. I went down. I was foolish out of love, because I believed that what I gave could be enough, that my sacrifice could change the course of someone's life. I gave everything I had, even what I didn't know I would miss. But, you know what? Even so, I had the courage to stand up. Today, I don't expect anyone else. I am enough. And you know what's more beautiful? It is that silence, when it comes after pain, becomes a shield. It becomes peace. When you learn to live for yourself, when you find strength in what was once fragility, nothing else can shake you. The truth is that we only learn to value our peace when we get tired of fighting the wrong battles. I won not by shouting, but by waiting. And when justice came, it was already ready. Every plant I water here on the porch, which my daughter once said took up too much space, is now a symbol. Each flower that sprouts is my victory, silent but profound. I want to thank you for staying with me so far. Every comment, every like, is like hugs of understanding, as if we were all sharing our stories. If you were touched by something I shared, or if you have ever been through something similar, let me know in the comments where you are watching. Let's make this conversation a meeting point, a space of support and respect. If you haven't signed up yet, the button is down there, and if you do, it's like an invitation for you to come back, as if you're being invited to an upcoming coffee shop, where we'll always have a good story to tell. Don't forget to activate the bell, so you don't miss it when the coffee is brewed again and the next video arrives. Now don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another amazing story.